This is in a sort of not trying, but maybe we'll see, weaving in something about doubt and light and dark, and the light and the darkness, and diving deeper and surfacing. One of the ways that many political activists in their understanding and the Dharma meet, and many other spiritual traditions actually, I think, accept Catholicism, but that isn't true of liberationist theology, which also has Catholic roots. So, is the understanding that essentially, that in the very essential structure of ourselves as a human being, there is love and the capacity for wisdom. And that can't be eradicated. That capacity and potential can't be eradicated. And that also, at the same time, there is the wiring and the capacity for the obstructions of that. Energies that actually cover up the inherent structure of human beings to love and to be wise. And the Buddha said that was true as far as he could see in his own enlightenment, where it was said that he could see everything. And so I'm going back to that, because especially in this time and what's happening economically, it's easy to forget that in all human beings is this capacity, and whether a human being makes very bad mistakes and is moved out of confusion, deep confusion or revenge, there's always this capacity in the right conditions, when they come, to awaken that love. And so in all the Buddha's time leading a Sangha, he only rejected or ejected one person from the Sangha, and that was his cousin. And he only ejected him not after his cousin tried to kill him, which his cousin did, and sort of say and do many things, but after he tried to, with his psychic powers, seduce the Sangha away from the Buddha as a teacher. And I'm just saying that because it was very inspiring to me that even though the Buddha's cousin tried to kill him, the Buddha kept wanting to create the best conditions for this cousin to heal. And I feel so moved by that movement that comes from this understanding of each human being's capacity in the right conditions to come to love and wisdom. Because it means you can never give a death sentence to ourselves or to others. In that framework, then, it feels so simple, our path, which is how can I build the conditions to awaken and strengthen that energy, or those energies of love and wisdom, and the other beautiful qualities, patience and generosity and right concentration and determination and truthfulness and equanimity and joy and calm and all the beautiful qualities. That in that it's not just the root of non-greed, non-hatred and non-delusion that we're awakening, but really we're in support as a model, because we're very imperfect, but as a model and as a guideline to be in service of those intentions and trying to create the conditions for them. And this coming together tonight is in service, right, to creating conditions for the beautiful qualities to strengthen and awaken inside of us. And at the same time, then it's clear that all the obstructions, which are clinging, wanting, not wanting, judgment, shame, blame, avarice, revenge, are energies that don't support that awakening of love, including doubt. So just like on the simplest level, that when we're in doubt, that energy itself is an obstruction. It can be transformed. It can be transformed because if we name it as an obstruction, we can let go of the thinking around it and come to meet the feeling that is living in the body around it. And when we do that over and over, whatever the fluttering of the mind not being able to settle, once we turn mindfulness to the embodied experience of it rather than the thinking, it begins to change, right? But we have to drop the storyline first. Yeah. And so it's not, having said that, then I want to share a story. I just did a somewhat retreat, because I was doing some business work too, but I did somewhat a retreat for 3 weeks in my home in Joshua Tree. And some various things had happened that had triggered some childhood trauma. So I was working with that. And the house I was living in was overrun with ants, red ants. So I had taken the precepts not to harm. So I was trying to work with cinnamon and baking soda, which had no effect whatsoever. So one evening I was sort of tired and I grabbed my jar of sunflower seeds and opened the jar and poured some sunflower seeds into my hand without looking that particularly and put them in my mouth. And they were filled with red ants. And these are the biting red ants. And they bit all inside my mouth and on my lips and my chin. And I went into deep and profound revenge. I spat them out and with glee put on the water and killed them. And then they were actually everywhere, and I just got my sponge and I just pushed all of them into the sink and killed them. And I killed many. And so I talking about going down into the depths and coming up. I felt so surprised at the level of my revenge and wishing to hurt these beings and actually acting them out. And it was such a learning experience for me about the ways we are wired to go into defense and protection. Yeah? When we've been shocked, but in the context, this is in the context of already working with trauma. So it felt like some boundary had been disrespected. I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is what happened, by the ants. And that it was just this huge reaction, like action, to defend myself from being hurt anymore. And it reminded me of the story that was in a Buddhist publication called The Turning Wheel that came out, I don't know if any of you used to see it, in the Bay Area. And they had an article on forgiveness. And it was about this Vietnam vet who was walking in Berkeley, and it was summer. And he was walking by a house with an open door, and there was some show on the TV with gunshots, war sounds. And he got triggered and he went into the house. There was an older woman living by herself called Eve Chandler, and he killed her. Oh. And then wrapped her in a blanket and put his number, his metal number, around her legs. And he, of course, his brother actually called the police and told him that, told the police, because he had mentioned what he had done. And he was arrested and convicted and was sentenced to death. And there was a big movement because he was in trauma to commute the sentence. I was Governor Gray at the time, and Governor Gray refused. But in the process of it, that support, something happened to him, and his heart and mind opened a little bit. For people who are about to die, you can ask whatever meal you want, which seems like the most ridiculous choice to give someone who's about to die. But nevertheless, and they didn't give him what he wanted. And so he said he went fasting, and they put him on the chair, and his last words before receiving the injection was, "I forgive you. I forgive you all." And I want to just acknowledge the sort of theme that I'm speaking to, which is how when we're triggered in each of the ways that we, because of our experience, can get triggered, and the resulting energy could be doubt. Some of us go into deep doubt and become paralyzed. It can be anger, hatred, and revenge. It can be paralysis. It can be obsessions and compulsions. It could be any of those things, right? As expressions, how impersonal it actually felt. It felt totally impersonal, like this is a wiring that happens for human beings. And that just as that soldier in those moments felt like something got triggered and there was no capacity to intercede, that the mind went into this, just a particular pattern. That's what happened with my mind too. It just went into this defensive mode of, I have to get rid of these ants because they're hurting me. And this is a sort of survival mechanism. In that sense, it felt very impersonal, and so it was a very beautiful lesson in feeling the condition of ourselves at humanity, and when there's a wounding that hasn't been healed, how the dynamics of that wounding operate. in terms of self-protection and the intensity of the expression of that dynamic. That's an extreme example, but when the mind is in that place, we don't go into those energies. When you talk about going deep, we don't go into it at all. So when it feels like something very intense is happening, the best thing to do is to acknowledge it and to actually take other places to rest the mind that are beautiful, which is what I did after the ants. I did a lot of metta and appreciative joy, and came back to balance, to really hold what was underneath that expression of revenge. And the same is true for doubt or any of the obstructions of the heart when they're that tense. And because of the intensity, it's not just one small thing in the moment, right? But that we know that it's touched something more deeply inside of us. And we don't even have to be, quote, wounded for that. The psychology of human beings is both this beautiful capacity to love and this capacity to harm, which is in all of us, which can get triggered in particular situations. And there are all kinds of experiments, right? The famous one about in Stanford University, where they asked particular students to be prison guards and to shock students who are playing the role of prisoners, and how those prison guards followed instructions, students just like us, even though the students who were the prisoners were saying, "Stop, that's hurting." The guards continued, the other students continued to give electric shocks to them because that was the instructions from their professors. So really, what we're saying is that in particular conditions, particular energies get triggered that can go to the deepest part of what the Buddha calls our ignorance and the wiring of ignorance, which is, that's a terrible word, right? The other wiring, we have two wirings, and the other wiring, which the Buddha names as ignorance, is the wiring which is experienced psychologically as inadequacy and homelessness and not good enough and insufficiency. The classic simile in the Buddha's teaching for suffering, the experience of this in the mind, is when an axle doesn't fit into the hole of a wheel properly, and so the wheel can't run smoothly. It's that not fitting that we experience, especially in cultures like this often. It's not finding a right place, not ever feeling quite at home, either in our bodies or in our work or in some aspect of our life, or just generally, like, yeah, we have friends, yes, we have lovers, yes, we might have a good relationships, and yet there's something that never feels like it's quite fitting. And that is the root. As there's a root of the capacity to love, there is the root for the capacity for confusion and dis-ease. And out of that comes the movement out to want to hold on and cling in order to find something to root with, or to push away and defend, or to split the scene into dissociation or fantasy. So that movement, I don't know if you've all experienced it, that sometimes you just are like inflexible. No, I have to have this, and I have to have it right now, Or no, I have to control this. I know I'm being controlling, but I can't stop myself, that's not just about the particular incident, but for whatever reason something's going on and it's taking us down to that place of ignorance. So it's the energy is connected to that basic insufficiency, and sometimes when we're that deep for whatever reason, we feel it's more difficult to intervene in those defensive energies that feel true and the right thing to do but never serve us. Right? So I wanted to add that complexity, because when we say, well, this whole practice is around creating beautiful energies and abandoning the obstructions, it isn't that easy, because it takes tremendous patience and care to understand what's happening and hold it. And when we do, like in that revenge of killing those ants, there was a great healing and purification that happened, because I just got, it's not that I'm a bad person, but just this is the dynamic, and I saw it so, I perceived it so clearly. In that understanding, something just dramatically shifted. So it's impersonal, but difficult to navigate, in the same way it was difficult to get those kids and the guide, the teacher, out of the caves. It takes tremendous care to extricate the mind from the depth of that reaction. And the only way we can do it is if that extrication happens without any judgment, shame, or blame. And that's just how incredibly important it is to see it not as something that's wrong with us or wrong with another person, like that soldier, but that, like, if you have a bacterial infection, this is what happens. If you're triggered at the depth of ignorance, this is what happens. It's lawful and not personal in that sense. And then of course it's like, in the same way that I acknowledged the harm and was accountable for the harm of taking the lives of all those ants. It's easy then to understand what happens in the minds of some of the people in power right now, and Trump is a great teacher for me in this way, because you see a mind triggered in trauma all the time, deeply defensive and acting out to protect himself and his community, right? By seeing particular groups of people, women, people of color, refugees, those seeking asylum, and as threats. And so that same almost revengeful energy, I totally understand. That is someone in trauma. And it doesn't mean we don't hold him and other people accountable, especially when they're in power. But in terms of judgment or shame or blame, none. Because it's just, I saw it right living inside of me, and it was just so clear and beautiful. So then we dedicate ourselves over and over, having seen and accounted for the ways that each of us have hurt other human beings, because each of us has, in one way or another, or animals, or whatever we've done. I don't know what, but we've all done something because we're not fully awakened. Then, when we're really honest and know and acknowledge it as that this dynamic lives in each one of us and lives in me, then it becomes so inspirational to keep abandoning whatever is unskillful and unwholesome, so that we build the wholesome energies to the place that the unwholesome ones have no space to come through anymore. And when that's true, that's what the 7 factors of enlightenment are. When those energies are in balance, then that the mind is held and protected by the beautiful energies. It's the condition for insight into just that pure insight into the first insight of acknowledging there's no self, there's no I. So, there's no separation. There's no separation from the flow of life, we could say that. So it really helps us to be vigilant, and then just to go back, and to say that the feeling of these energies has to be felt. We can't bypass them and say, oh, my doubt is unwholesome, I'm just going to just bypass it. We have to actually feel in our bodies the feeling. But the thoughts, these ants are dangerous, and that's not true. The thoughts around the doubt aren't true either, because doubt is an unwholesome energy. So the thoughts are always distorted and not true when they originate in one of the obstructive energies. So if you find yourself dithering, I don't know, is this true? What's my path? What's right? What's wrong? You'll never find the truth to it. There's no truth on that level. We have to let go of the thinking and drop down and meet the feelings, the revenge in that case, and then find a different option for the ants. So, and my option was keeping the kitchen meticulously clean, with no sunflower seeds. They were crazy for sunflower seeds, except in 100% sealed bottle. So, but that was really what I did. So I didn't. I mean, there were ants still, but not in that way, not so overrun. So that might be enough for now. Do you have any questions? Because that was a somewhat complex framework.
When you were talking about, it's impersonal, the reaction that you have, I guess I'm just, the connection between that and then the karma of your, origination of, our actions from even just kind of the feeling tone of not wanting or wanting, right? So I'm just trying to connect that you're saying that it is impersonal to react that way to karma. The idea that we're still kind of making choices even with that aversion or craving.
Right. I think because I was on retreat, when I was in the revenge, I didn't understand it was being impersonal. It was only afterwards, when it had moved through me and I reflected on it, I perceived it clearly as an impersonal process. In the middle of it, I acted it out. That was karmic. It was karmic. It was a violation of the integrity of my body, and I was acting out in that moment from that deep trauma. So in the middle of it, it wasn't impersonal. I mean, it was impersonal, but I was identified with it. But afterwards, when I kept practicing, then, and I reflected on it a day later, I think it was 2 days later, then I just saw, it's an impersonal process. And it's an impersonal process, and it so clarified what I say over and over again. And every teacher has a particular thing that they talk about over and over again, and mine is abandoning the unwholesome and supporting the wholesome. That's my mantra over and over again. And so I will reap the karma of the killing all those ants and the rage of identifying with that kind of revenge and rage, absolutely. On the other hand, in terms of the law of karma, it isn't deterministic. So just to say that you can do something really awful and kill 100 people, and the karma depends on the quality of the mind when the fruition of the karma comes. And so, Angulimala, that very famous person in the Buddha's time who killed 100 people, the karma of the killing is that people would throw bad food at him and not feed him as a monk, because he ordained with the Buddha Sangha. But he had already reached enlightenment, and there was no suffering. There was just understanding of what was happening. And so, according to the qualities in the mind, the karmic consequences really change. So karma isn't predetermined or linear in that way. It's moderated through the conditions of the mind. So you can do something terrible, like kill all those ants. You can break the precepts in that way, but then when some wisdom happens and it's clear that you are interfacing with a difficult challenge or difficult situation that might be the fruition of that karma, it lands very differently. So it isn't tit for tat karma. It's very moderated by the conditions of the mind and changes over time because of that. And that's what's beautiful about karma, is that it's sort of like going back to that image that Thich Nhat Hanh gave us, that if all the seeds we're planting these different seeds, so some wholesome or all the intentions for goodness and healing that I have, and then planting some unwholesome seeds, like killing ants. And as we keep watering predominantly the wholesome flowers, they take over the greenhouse. And the unwholesome plants have less and less space to root and to be nourished. And that's an image of the purification process. And so then how difficult conditions might land in that greenhouse, like, no water for a while. If the wholesome plants are really strong, they'll withstand it. And that's how it works. Yeah.
You said it took 2 days for that insight about it being impersonal to arise. Before that, did you feel shame and blame arise and you dealt with it, or did they not even arise?
I didn't go through any shame or blame. I felt shaken by the intensity of the revenge. It felt like a bit of an earthquake to me, to feel that unintervened depth and intensity of wanting to hurt other beings. That was shocking. and I felt like my mind was very ruffled. And so then I very intentionally did a lot of metta and appreciative joy practice, and mindfulness, of course, too. And then it just like, oh, that's what happened. Yeah. I was meeting with the manager of the center where I live, and I said to her, "You have to give me poison. You have to go and buy poison. I can't live with these ants." I met with her right after I killed them, and so she left me the ant poison at the door, and of course, by the time I got it, I couldn't use it. It's just so yeah. Well, good. Yeah. Yes.
You said in that moment of feeling triggered to find an alternative, and just thinking of that moment of
stop. I'm feeling triggered to find an alternative
to the fear or revenge or
I keep going, and then I'll
I was wondering a little bit more about how to do that, because when you notice, okay, this is this impersonal process that's happening, that's fear, that's revenge.
Right.
Where does the alternative come from in that moment? I guess.
In the moment, if in the moment it's triggered, and this all came from Calvin's question, when the trigger goes deeply to a core of a trauma, it's very difficult to intervene in that moment. Just to say that, it's very difficult to intervene, and I didn't. There was no wish to intervene. I just wanted to kill them. In situations where it isn't so core, as we notice that energy, we can say to ourselves, you need to step out of the situation. Like remove yourself from the situation, give your mind a different object. Like if it's the ants, let's say I wasn't quite so triggered, it would be get out of the living room and go for a walk before you do anything else, Arena. Like give your mind some time to come back into balance before you respond. So you could do that. If you're meditating, for example, and something intense comes up, then it might be, if it's really intense, get up and walk outside. Go have a cup of tea, stand on your head, have a shower. Give your mind a different object of experience. Go for a swim. Like give your mind something where you drop the thinking. Oh, those ants, You drop the thinking and you come to your body. And you're cultivating mindfulness and presence to a more neutral experience, like swimming, walking, singing, something that actually helps the mind to settle down. So the single most important thing in the process of dropping it is the thought associated with the trauma. The thought for me is the ants are too dangerous. I can't navigate them. They're biting me and hurting me. I have to kill them. That was the thought. Of course, it wasn't true. I can. But in that moment, it felt like I had to kill them in order to be safe. So, yeah. And, just to say the beauty of having something as a practitioner, that's that deep and profound is that it clarifies the teaching, which is that any thought associated with an intense negative reaction is never true, even though in that moment it felt totally true, and that the energies are energies that will never bring us happiness or liberation. That revenge, anger, hatred, greed, that they are energies that can never serve us unless we practice around them and then they serve to teach us. Then they're great teaching. So that's
Thank you for sharing that, Arena.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a very deep teaching.
It was.
For you to take something that heartfelt, that I believe shame and blame would have risen for me, but to then share it with us so that we can also get that teaching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah. Anything else? So then, just sort of as an is there anything else you're looking? Who's looking at?
I took a deep breath and the was like, "You're about to say something." Yeah. So I think, like I understand the dropping of the thoughts, like at the moment of anger or whatever it is that's the trigger. I can associate with that too, but I think I like to hear more about when you said connecting with the feeling. Like, yes, I know this is not a wholesome thought. Yes, I'm walking away, and not in the condition of retreat where life keeps moving and you keep busy and you're like, okay, let's put this thing aside and move on to something else, and then you run into that, trigger again, and like, okay, put that aside, like. What?
I'm actually not. I'm not actually saying that. Full stop. I'm saying in the moment of the trigger, put it aside, but absolutely come back to it. We have to come back to our triggers, because they'll just get stronger and worse if we don't. So we have to come back. And I did. I felt. The only reason I could say to you everything I'm saying is because I came back to it and I felt the rage and I understood where it came from. And that it was like, and it made sense. Everything made sense, which is why there wasn't any shame and blame. It was just like, oh, this is a young child's response to a life-threatening situation. And just like that soldier, this is a response to a life-threatening situation. Gunfire, I have to kill the enemy. So, but in order to, for the healing, we have to stay with that rage, and I did for 2 days. First, the feeling of wanting to hurt, the revenge, and then anger underneath, and then the fear underneath that.
So you explore that feeling.
I felt
when
them.
You say
Yes. Yes. I opened up. I sat, and spent hours feeling those feelings. Right. And when my mind got tired and when it would go into thinking or strategizing, then I would stop, I would walk, refresh, and then I would come back. And and so I wish there was a way to bypass it, but in my own experience there isn't. There's no way to bypass what's living inside of us. The question that we each have to learn for ourselves is, how much do I turn towards it, and when do I take the breaks, and what type of breaks work for my mind? Because different minds need different things for refreshment and support, but not just refreshment, for building the strength to contain those energies. So I imagine what, like all the war situations that are happening in the world, like being in Sudan or Yemen or even, being queer in Africa and dealing with a lot of hatred being directed at us. Any of those situations, when it feels our life's at stake, can we prepare for that? In a way, can we prepare for it by really focusing on the beautiful qualities that live inside of us? Because that's what builds the strength. So the practice of loving kindness and appreciative joy, I really got how important they are.
Yeah.
And that means over and over again, each of us turning to what's beautiful inside of us and acknowledging it and appreciating it and contemplating it. For any action that is caring and generous or patient or committed or kind or honest or truthful, to notice it, to support it, to appreciate it. Every single time you notice that energy arising, appreciating it, and appreciating it in other people all the time, so that we create a culture that mirrors back both parts of ourselves, that we account for the wiring of ignorance, and even more, or as importantly, we mirror back that we are beautiful beings with this capacity to love and be generous and kind and wise and empathic and compassionate and everything else. And that is so underrated. It is in our practice and in this culture. But
well, if you feel like a victim though, or you're traumatized, you're going, the trauma is what you're feeling and you're feeling victimized by that. I think it's really hard at times to see the goodness there inside yourself.
it is.
If in fact you're feeling, if you're caught up in that and you're responding from that place. Thinking about classism or to be poor in this country, to be a person of color, to be a woman. I mean, those kind of things are, you get re-victimized, you get stimulated a lot from that. There's no escaping it.
Yeah. Right.
So.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I agree that I see that it's better to focus on the wholesome aspects, but we're living in a really unwholesome place.
And that's why we come together in circles like this.
Yes.
But more than that. Part of the commitment we have to ourselves is to find what our gateways are to reconnect with what's beautiful. I mean, that is our job.
Well, I like that part you're talking about, the containment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I think that I just want to sort of backtrack. I want to acknowledge that often in our communities we don't give space to share those places of suffering.
That's a good point.
Yes, and that when we do, we create a space where, because we're being heard and seen and acknowledged in that place, we create environments that then help us to begin to feel that caring and empathy, right? And that's one of the gateways. And so, yes, I think it's often too, it's something that we can easily bypass, is because it feels like things are so hard that we want to bypass the ongoing triggering of some of the trauma that we've experienced in our lives in that way. And so it's really important for us to have space for both places, to acknowledge those, because that's how we heal. We can't heal that stuff alone. We have to be in community to heal it. I think that's really important. So thanks for saying that. So I know that it's time to come to closure. What I'd like to do, just so that we sort of I want to pull it together a little bit, is for 2 minutes, just to take 2 more minutes, I'd like you to find someone you don't know that well and take 1 minute and share a beautiful quality you appreciate about yourself that you would like to honor. And then the other person can. So just switch seats.